War took him, but left me his son. The words escaped Catherine Wilson's lips like autumn leaves carried by an unforgiving wind, each syllable heavy with the weight of months spent grieving. She stood at the kitchen window of their small farmhouse, her calloused fingers tracing patterns on the frost-covered glass, watching 7-year-old Henry chase chickens in the yard. His laughter cut through the November silence like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, innocent and pure, untouched by the darkness that had settled over their lives like a shroud. But what she didn't know was that this moment of simple joy would be the last one for many months to come. The empty chair at the head of their wooden table seemed to grow larger each morning, becoming a monument to absence that dominated their small kitchen. Thomas's blue uniform still hung in the wardrobe, pressed and waiting, the brass buttons gleaming in the dim light as if he might walk through that door any second and ask her to help him fasten them the way she had done 100 times before. The scent of his tobacco still lingered in the fabric, a ghost that refused to leave their home, haunting every corner with memories of evening pipes and quiet conversations by the fire. Their neighbors had stopped visiting weeks ago. The initial flood of casseroles and condolences had dried up like a creek in summer, leaving Catherine and Henry to navigate their grief alone. Mrs. Patterson from the neighboring farm still nodded politely when they met at the general store, but her eyes held that particular mixture of pity and discomfort that Catherine had grown to recognize. Widowhood, she had learned, made people uncomfortable. It reminded them of their own mortality, their own fragile happiness. "Mama, when is Papa coming back from the war?" Henry's voice drifted in from the porch where he sat polishing his father's old boots, a ritual he performed every Sunday without fail, buffing the leather until it shone like mahogany. Catherine's heart clenched like a fist around broken glass, the familiar ache spreading through her chest. She had answered this question dozens of times, but Henry's young mind seemed unable to hold on to the terrible truth. "He's not coming back, sweet boy. Remember, Papa's with the angels now." "But why don't the angels give him back? I've been real good. I helped with the chickens every day and I didn't complain about the beans even though they taste like dirt." How do you explain to a child that war devours fathers like winter devours crops? That letters stop coming not because love ends, but because life does? That sometimes good men march off to fight for what's right and never come home to see their sons grow tall? Catherine knelt beside her son, smoothing his dark hair that reminded her so painfully of Thomas, the same stubborn cowlick that refused to lie flat no matter how much water she used. "Sometimes being good isn't enough, Henry. Sometimes we lose people we love, and all we can do is remember how much they loved us. Your Papa loved you more than all the stars in the sky." The November wind rattled the windows of their small house, carrying with it the whispers of neighbors who had already begun to talk. "Poor Catherine Wilson," they'd say over their evening tea, shaking their heads with practiced sympathy. "Whatever will she do now? A woman alone with a child? It's not proper. It's not safe. Mark my words, she'll be remarried within the year, or worse, she'll lose that farm and end up in the poorhouse." But Catherine had stopped caring about proper the moment that official letter arrived, sealed with military wax and heavy with words that changed everything. She could still remember the weight of it in her trembling hands, the way the paper felt rough and official. "We regret to inform you that Private Thomas Wilson was killed in action at Petersburg." The rest had blurred together like ink in the rain, though she had read it dozens of times since, as if repetition might change the meaning of those terrible words. And that was when everything changed. The woman who had once worried about the perfect Sunday dress and whether her apple pies were sweet enough for the church social had died alongside her husband on that battlefield. In her place stood someone harder, someone who had learned that survival required sacrificing the luxury of grief. She had two choices: crumble under the weight of loss like so many widows before her, or rise like the morning sun after the darkest night. Catherine chose to rise even though her knees trembled with the effort and her heart felt like it had been carved out with a dull blade. She would work their small patch of land with her own hands. She would raise their son to be the man his father would have been proud of. She would survive no matter what it cost her. Yet the real challenge was still ahead, waiting in the cold months to come. The first snows of winter were already dusting the distant mountains like powdered sugar on a dark cake, and Catherine knew that surviving the cold months ahead would require strength she wasn't sure she possessed. Their savings had dwindled to almost nothing, the small leather pouch where Thomas had kept their emergency money now containing only a few coins that clinked together like broken promises. The small vegetable garden behind the house had provided what it could, but winter demanded more than wilted carrots and preserved beans. The roof leaked in 3 places. The barn door hung crooked on its hinges, letting in wind that made the animals restless. Firewood needed splitting, but the axe felt impossibly heavy in her unused hands, raising blisters that broke and bled before forming calluses. Everything Thomas had made look effortless now seemed insurmountable. "Mama, I'm hungry," Henry whispered one evening, as they sat by the meager fire, sharing a single bowl of thin soup that was more water than substance. His small face looked gaunt in the firelight, his eyes too big for his pale cheeks. Catherine's throat tightened with guilt and determination. "I know, darling. Tomorrow I'll go to town and see about finding more work. Maybe Mrs. Henderson needs help with her sewing, or perhaps the general store could use someone to help with inventory." But what she didn't know was that tomorrow would bring more than just the hope for work. It would bring a stranger whose own heart had been carved hollow by the same war that had claimed her husband, a man carrying his own burden of loss and searching for redemption in the simple act of helping others. That night, as Catherine tucked Henry into the bed they now shared to conserve both warmth and the cost of heating oil, she pressed a kiss to his forehead and whispered a prayer she'd been repeating for weeks like a desperate incantation. "Please God, show me how to be enough for him. Show me how to be both mother and father. Show me how to keep going when everything inside me wants to stop. Give me strength I don't have, wisdom I don't possess, and hope when there seems to be none left." Outside their window, snow began to fall in earnest, blanketing the world in a silence that felt both peaceful and ominous. Each flake that settled on the windowsill reminded Catherine of time passing, of winter deepening, of the approaching test of their endurance. And somewhere across town, another soul was asking similar questions of the same starlit sky, a man who had returned from war broken in ways that weren't visible to the naked eye, carrying guilt heavier than any physical wound. But Catherine didn't know about him yet. All she knew was that tomorrow she would rise again, as she had every day since that letter arrived, and she would find a way to keep her son fed and warm and safe. Because sometimes love isn't enough, but sometimes it's all you have, and sometimes it's all you need to take the next step into an uncertain future. The morning came gray and bitter, with ice crystals painting the windows like delicate spider webs. Catherine woke before dawn, as had become her habit, her body aching from another restless night on the thin mattress she now shared with Henry. The little boy lay curled against her side, his breathing soft and even, one small hand clutching the wooden horse his father had carved for his 6th birthday. In sleep, Henry looked so peaceful, so innocent of the harsh realities that daylight would bring. But what Catherine didn't realize was that this day would mark the beginning of her greatest test yet. She dressed quietly in the pre-dawn darkness, wrapping herself in Thomas's heavy wool coat that still smelled faintly of him, a bittersweet comfort that both warmed and wounded her heart. The coat hung loose on her smaller frame, the sleeves too long, but it was the warmest thing she owned. Today she would walk to town hat in hand, searching for any work that might keep them fed through the approaching winter. The walk to Millbrook took nearly an hour through the snow-covered fields. Each step was a battle against the wind that cut through the valley like a knife, carrying with it the promise of harder days ahead. Catherine's worn boots, patched with leather scraps and determination, left deep prints in the fresh snow, a lonely trail marking her desperate journey. The town square buzzed with its usual morning activity. Men in heavy coats discussed grain prices and weather, their breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Women hurried between shops, their faces hidden beneath thick shawls and bonnets, baskets clutched tightly against their bodies. But as Catherine approached the general store, the conversation seemed to quiet, eyes following her progress with that mixture of pity and judgment she had learned to dread. "There's the Wilson woman," she heard Mrs. Carpenter whisper to her companion. "Poor thing trying to manage on her own. Mark my words, she'll be begging for charity before Christmas." "Or worse," came the reply. "A woman alone with a child, well, it's just not natural. She should have accepted the Morrison boys' proposal. Pride goeth before a fall, they say." But what they didn't understand was that Catherine's refusal of young Jacob Morrison's hurried proposal hadn't been about pride. It had been about love, the kind of love that doesn't die with death, the kind that makes settling for less feel like betrayal. Catherine pushed through the door of Henderson's general store, the little bell announcing her arrival with a cheerful jingle that seemed to mock the gravity of her situation. Henderson, a portly man with kind eyes hidden behind wire spectacles, looked up from his ledger with a smile that faded slightly when he recognized her. "Mrs. Wilson," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "What can I do for you this morning?" "Mr. Henderson, I was wondering, that is, I hoped you might have some work available. Cleaning, organizing inventory, anything at all. I'm a hard worker, and I need—" Her voice trailed off as she noticed the way his expression shifted, the polite smile becoming strained. Behind her she could hear the whispered conversations of the other customers, their words like needles pricking at her already wounded pride. "Well now, Mrs. Wilson, I appreciate your situation. Truly I do. But you understand, a business needs stability, reliability. And with a young child at home, Henry would be no trouble. I could work while he's sleeping, or bring him along. He's a good boy, quiet as a mouse." But even as she spoke the words, Catherine could see the doubt in his eyes, could feel the weight of the town's expectations pressing down on her like a physical thing. Women didn't work in stores. Widows remarried quickly or depended on family. The natural order of things had no place for a woman trying to stand alone. And that was when everything became clear. She was fighting not just poverty and winter but the very fabric of what society expected from someone like her. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilson. Perhaps you should speak with Pastor Mackenzie about other arrangements." The walk home felt longer than the journey there. Each step weighted down with disappointment and growing desperation. The wind had picked up, driving snow horizontally across the fields, stinging her face and making her eyes water. Or perhaps those were tears. She couldn't tell anymore. "Did you find work, Mama?" he asked, as she stamped the snow from her boots and hung Thomas's coat on its peg by the door. The little boy was quiet for a long moment, his 7-year-old mind wrestling with concepts too big for his years. "I think Papa wouldn't like another man sleeping in his bed, and I think you cry enough already without having to pretend to love somebody else." The simple wisdom of children, Catherine thought, could break your heart faster than any tragedy. She knelt down and pulled Henry into her arms, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair, feeling the solid weight of him against her chest, the one perfect thing left in her shattered world. Yet she had no idea that salvation was already on its way, walking through the same snow-covered fields she had just traversed. That evening, as they shared another meager meal of bread and thin broth, Catherine tried to calculate how long their remaining supplies would last. A week, perhaps 2 if she ate even less, and gave Henry larger portions. The mathematics of desperation were simple and unforgiving. "Tell me about when Papa was little," Henry said, as he did every night, settling against her side as the fire burned low in the grate. Catherine closed her eyes and began the familiar ritual, painting pictures with words of a young Thomas climbing apple trees and catching fireflies, stories that kept her husband alive in their small cabin even as the world outside grew colder and darker. But what she didn't know was that across town another man was lying awake, staring at his own ceiling, wrestling with memories that wouldn't let him sleep and a guilt that followed him like a shadow. Daniel Brooks had returned from the war 6 months ago, but the war had never left him. It lived in his dreams, in the way sudden sounds made him reach for weapons that weren't there, in the hollow ache where his heart used to be. He had lost more than friends on those battlefields. He had lost his faith in God and humanity, in the basic goodness that made life worth living. But tomorrow fate would intervene in the most unexpected way. Tomorrow a chance encounter would begin to heal 2 broken souls, though neither would recognize it at first for what it was: hope wearing the disguise of simple human kindness. The axe felt impossibly heavy. Catherine's breath clouded in the cold morning air, her fingers numb, her shoulders aching with exhaustion. Each failed swing was not only against the wood but against the creeping fear that she could not keep this household standing through another winter. In Catherine's hands. 3 days had passed since her town visit, and Thomas's firewood was nearly gone. She brought the blade down with desperate force. It bounced off harmlessly. Henry was watching from the window, and she would not let him see her break. But what she didn't realize was that someone else was watching too. "You're holding it wrong." The voice startled her not only because it was unexpected. For a heartbeat she wondered if she should fear him, if every whispered warning from the town was right, yet something in his tired eyes told her he carried no threat, only burdens heavier than her own. But because it carried the rasp of someone who had shouted over battlefields, who had spoken last words to dying comrades. The voice came from behind her, deep and quiet. Catherine spun around, heart hammering. A tall man stood at her property's edge, with a jagged scar from temple to ear. I'm Daniel Brooks. I live near Miller's Creek. He gestured toward her woodpile. Looks like you could use some help. Catherine gripped the axe handle tighter. She had heard whispers in town about the soldier who returns changed, who kept to himself. I can manage just fine on my own. But they both knew it was a lie. Evidence lay scattered around the woodpile, logs barely nicked by her attempts. Sometimes accepting help isn't about what we can do alone, Daniel said. Sometimes it's about what we can accomplish together. And that was when everything shifted, though neither recognized it at first. Catherine studied his face, searching for signs she had learned to recognize. But Daniel's eyes held the same hollow ache she saw in her own mirror each morning. "Mama!" Henry burst from the kitchen door. His small boots slapped against the frozen earth, his cheeks red from the fire's warmth. In his eyes there was no hesitation, no suspicion, only the endless curiosity of a boy who still believes strangers might turn into heroes. "There's a man in our yard." "It's all right, sweet boy." Mr. Brooks was just passing through. But Henry approached with fearless curiosity. "Are you a soldier?" "Papa was a soldier too, but he's with the Angels now." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I was a soldier, yes." "Did you know my papa, Thomas Wilson? He was very brave and could split wood faster than anybody." "I didn't know him personally, son. But if he was brave like you say, then he was a good soldier." Henry beamed, and Catherine felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking but softening. This scarred man had given her son pride in a father he barely remembered. "Can you split wood like Papa could?" Henry asked. Daniel's eyes moved to Catherine, asking permission. The pile of unsplit logs stood between them and another freezing night, and pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. "One log," she said finally. Daniel handled the axe with reverence. When he brought the blade down, it split the log cleanly in two. "Again," Henry clapped. "Do another one." Somehow, one log became a dozen. Daniel worked in silence, each swing perfectly controlled. Catherine watched the way concentration erased the haunted look from his eyes. "That's enough," she said. "Thank you, but I can't pay you." "Didn't ask for payment." "Then why? Why help a stranger?" Daniel was quiet, gazing beyond the horizon. "Because sometimes helping someone else is the only way to help yourself." Yet she had no idea that this simple act would change everything. As Daniel prepared to leave, Henry tugged at Catherine's skirt. "Mama, can Mr. Brooks stay for supper?" "Henry, Mr. Brooks probably has his own supper waiting." But Daniel had stopped. "Actually, I was planning beans from a can. Your soup sounds better." Their soup was little more than broth and hope. The pot hissed faintly, releasing a thin steam that smelled of onions and faded herbs. Catherine had managed to save from summer. Wooden bowls chipped at the edges were set carefully on the table as if they were fine china. For Henry, this meal felt like a true feast. It was not the food but the laughter that brushed against its edges. "It's not much, just vegetables and water." "Ma'am, I've eaten hardtack and muddy creek water." Anything made with care tastes like a feast. And that was when she made the decision that would alter everything. "Henry," said another place. The meal that followed was unlike anything since Thomas's death. Their kitchen felt alive again. Henry chattered about his chickens while Daniel listened. "Mr. Brooks," Henry said, "do you have a little boy like me?" The question created silence. Daniel's fork stopped. "No," he said finally. "I don't have a son." Something in his tone made Catherine's heart ache. "Well," Henry said, "maybe you could be like a papa to me sometimes. Not a real papa, because that's for my papa with the Angels. But maybe like a practice papa." Daniel's face went very still. Being any kind of papa is a very important job, the kind that requires worthiness. "But you split wood good and you're nice to mama, and you didn't laugh about my chickens having names. I think that makes you pretty worthy." And there it was. The moment when three broken pieces began to recognize they might fit together. Catherine saw Daniel's expression crack, revealing something vulnerable. She felt her walls begin to crumble, letting in the first light she had seen in months. "Maybe I could come by tomorrow," Daniel said quietly. "Check on that woodpile." "Really?" Henry's face lit up. "And maybe show me how to use the axe?" "We'll see," Daniel said, but his tone suggested possibility. As he prepared to leave, Catherine walked him to the gate. "Daniel, why did you really stop today?" He was quiet for long moments. When he spoke, his words carried confession's weight. "I heard about your husband, about Petersburg. I was there too. Catherine's breath caught. Did you know him? Not personally. But I knew men like him. Good men who died for something they believed in. He looked at her directly. I came home, Mrs. Wilson. Your husband didn't. That's not fair, but maybe I can help carry some of the weight he left behind. The days after Daniel's visit unfolded with a strange, almost tender rhythm. Catherine woke each morning with the weight of habit still on her shoulders, yet something had shifted. When she stepped outside to fetch water or gather wood, her ears strained for the crunch of boots on snow. She scolded herself for such foolishness. But the heart seldom listens to reason. Henry was less guarded. "Mama," he asked at breakfast, crumbs clinging to his lips, "do you think Mr. Brooks will come back today?" Sometimes he asked 3 or 4 times before noon, each inquiry carrying the same spark of hope. Catherine tried to temper his excitement, reminding him that strangers came and went. But each time she spoke the words, her own heart whispered the opposite. Please let him return. Evenings by the fire felt different now. Catherine's sewing hands stilled more often, her thoughts wandering to the soldier's scarred face, the quiet steadiness in his eyes. She wondered what weight he carried, what ghosts lingered in his silence. Henry, oblivious to her worries, often built little forts of blankets and declared, "When Mr. Brooks comes, he can help defend us." The boy's faith made Catherine's chest ache with both pride and fear. The woodpile outside stood taller than it had in years, yet every log seemed to remind her of Daniel's hands splitting them. It was as if the house itself had absorbed his presence, a subtle imprint that refused to fade. Catherine felt safer, though she would never admit it aloud. And in the solitude of night, when Henry finally slept, she caught herself praying, not for miracles, but for footsteps in the snow. So when the first signs of Henry's illness appeared, a cough that rattled his small chest, a heat rising in his skin, Catherine's fear sharpened into certainty. She knew with a clarity that startled her, whose name her heart would call if the boy's life trembled on the edge. And though the storm clouds were already gathering beyond the hills, she could not shake the feeling that fate had already chosen the path that would lead Daniel Brooks back to their door. 3 days had passed since Daniel's visit. Catherine found herself listening for his footsteps each morning. Henry asked constantly, "When will Mr. Brooks come back?" But what Catherine didn't expect was how fate would answer that question. It started with Henry coughing at breakfast. By midday, fever flushed his cheeks. By evening, his small body burned with heat no cool cloths could tame. "Mama," Henry whispered above the rattling windows. "I'm so cold, but I'm hot." Catherine pressed her hand to his forehead. The fever was much worse than she'd thought. She had seen this in other children during harsh winters. Some survived. Others, she couldn't think about others. "Mama, is Papa coming to get me? I think I see him in the corner." Terror gripped Catherine's throat. Henry's eyes were glassy, staring at empty spaces. Hallucinations. The fever was stealing her son away. "No, sweet boy. Papa's not coming yet. You're staying right here." But Catherine felt her certainty crumbling. The storm had raged for 2 days, making roads impassable. She was alone with a desperately sick child, no doctor within reach. And that was when everything began to unravel. She tried everything. Cool cloths Henry threw off. Willow bark tea he couldn't keep down. Prayers whispered through tears. But Henry's breathing grew labored and the fever wouldn't break. By midnight, Catherine knelt beside his bed, holding his burning hand, when she heard boots on the porch. "Mrs. Wilson?" Daniel's voice cut through the storm. Catherine stumbled to the door. Daniel stood in swirling snow, coat white with ice. "I saw your lamp burning late. Something's wrong." "It's Henry." Her voice broke. "He's burning with fever and I don't know what to do." Daniel stepped inside. "How long has he been this way?" "Since morning. It's getting worse." But what she didn't realize was that Daniel had fought this battle before, in field hospitals, watching young men burn with fever while he prayed for miracles. Daniel moved to Henry's bedside. The little boy tossed restlessly, dark hair plastered with sweat. Daniel placed a gentle hand on Henry's forehead. "Henry, son, can you hear me? Mr. Brooks, did you come to see Papa too? He's right there, but he won't talk to me. Your Papa's watching over you, but he's not ready for you to join him yet. You need to fight this fever. Can you do that?" "I'm trying, but I'm so tired." "I know, son, but you're strong, just like your Papa." Catherine watched with wonder. This distant man was speaking to her delirious child with infinite gentleness. "What do you need me to do?" Catherine whispered. "Keep the fire burning. I need to bring his fever down gradually. Too fast, and we could lose him." The words "lose him" hit Catherine like a blow. Yet she had no idea how close to the edge they really were. Daniel worked through the night with focused intensity. He rotated cool cloths, measured willow bark tea, monitored Henry's breathing with field medic precision. During the darkest hour, when Henry's fever spiked and his small body began convulsing, Catherine saw something in Daniel she would never forget. "No!" The word tore from Daniel's throat. "Not this boy, not another boy." His hands shook as he gathered Henry against his chest. "Lord, don't take another child from me. I can't carry that weight again." Another child. Catherine's heart clenched with understanding. "Daniel," she whispered, placing her hand on his shoulder. "His name was Timothy," Daniel said quietly. "My brother's boy, 7 years old just like Henry, got sick in the army camp. I held him while fever took him, and I swore I'd never care about another child again." There it was. Why Daniel seemed reluctant to accept Henry's invitation to be a practice papa. Not because he didn't want to care, but because he was terrified of losing again. But what neither of them expected was that sharing this burden would make them both stronger. "You won't lose Henry," Catherine said with fierce certainty. "We won't lose him." "Catherine, you're not alone in this fight, Daniel. Neither of us is alone anymore." They worked side by side through the remaining hours, taking turns holding Henry, spelling each other when exhaustion threatened, two people moving in perfect synchronization, sharing fear and hope. Just before dawn, Henry's breathing began to slow and deepen. The terrible heat began to subside. His eyes, when they opened, were clear. "Mama? Why are you crying?" Catherine laughed through tears, gathering her son close. "Because you scared me, sweet boy. But I'm right here. And Mr. Brooks is here too." Henry looked to where Daniel sat exhausted in the chair. "Did you stay all night?" "Wild horses couldn't have dragged me away, son." Catherine heard something that made her heart soar. Daniel had called Henry son without thinking. As Henry drifted into peaceful sleep, Catherine walked Daniel to the kitchen where morning light filtered through frost-covered windows. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to." "Yes, I do." Catherine reached for his hands. "I couldn't have saved him alone." "You were strong enough, Catherine. You just weren't alone." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. "Daniel, what you said about Timothy, it wasn't a burden. It was truth, and truth is what makes us trust each other." Daniel's eyes searched her face. "I can't lose another child I've grown to love." "Then stay," Catherine said simply. "Stay and be the father he needs." But what she didn't dare say was that she wanted Daniel to stay for her own sake too. As Daniel prepared to leave, Henry called out, "Mr. Brooks, will you come back tonight?" "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it, son." As Catherine watched Daniel walk into the winter morning, she knew he would be back, not just for a few days, but for all the days that mattered. Maybe war took everything from them both, but tonight they had fought it back together. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a world transformed by silence and snow. Catherine stood at the kitchen window, watching sunlight pierce through dissipating clouds. The wind that had rattled their windows for 3 days had finally stilled, replaced by peace so profound it felt like prayer answered. Behind her she could hear the soft, steady breathing of her son. Not the labored gasps that had terrified her, but the deep rhythm of healing sleep. Henry had turned a corner just as dawn broke, his fever breaking like the storm itself. But what filled Catherine's heart with the deepest gratitude was not just her son's recovery, but the man who had made it possible. Daniel had stayed through the night, never leaving Henry's bedside. This was not the broken, distant man she had first encountered by her woodpile. This was someone who had found his way back to humanity, through caring for a child who had somehow become his heart. "Mama?" Henry's voice, though still weak, carried the clear tone of a boy who was going to be just fine. "Is Mr. Brooks still here?" Catherine turned from the window. "He's chopping wood for us, sweet boy." "He didn't leave?" "No, darling, he didn't leave." The rhythmic sound of an axe splitting wood echoed from the yard, each strike steady and reassuring. For the first time since Thomas died, Catherine was not facing the world alone. Yet she had no idea that outside Daniel Brooks was fighting his own battle with the past. Each swing of the axe was meditation and warfare, working through emotions churning inside him since Henry's crisis passed. He had built walls around his heart for so long, But Henry Wilson, with his innocent trust, had dismantled those defenses as surely as spring melts snow. The boy was alive. The fever had broken. The terrible replay of Timothy's death had instead become something miraculous, a second chance redemption he had never dared hope for. "Daniel?" Catherine's voice was soft behind him. He turned and saw her standing in the doorway wrapped in Thomas's old coat. Morning light caught auburn threads in her brown hair. "How is he?" Daniel asked. "Asking for breakfast. A good sign. The best sign." Daniel set the axe aside. "Catherine, about last night, about Timothy." The name still hurt, but not with the sharp pain it once carried. "I never thought I'd care about another child. I was so afraid of losing again that I'd rather live with emptiness. And now? Now I realize that emptiness isn't living. It's just existing." Catherine stepped closer. "You saved Henry's life, but more than that, you gave him something I couldn't give alone." "What's that?" "The feeling of being safe. Really, truly safe. You gave that feeling to me too." And that was when everything crystallized for Daniel Brooks, like morning frost forming perfect patterns on glass. He had spent 2 years running from loss, choosing isolation over heartbreak, but watching Catherine fight for her son had shown him something. Love wasn't about avoiding loss. Love was about choosing to care anyway. "Catherine," he began, overwhelmed. "I know it's complicated. I know we both carry scars. But Henry needs a father. Someone who understands that being a parent means more than obligation. Someone who would fight death itself rather than let harm come to a child he's grown to love." "And what do you need?" "Someone who sees me as a partner, not a problem to be solved." But what neither of them expected was how easily the truth would come when it was time to speak it. "You're the reason I believe in tomorrow again," Daniel said quietly. "For 2 years I've been just trying to survive. But watching you fight, seeing how you refuse to let tragedy break you, it made me want to build something worth surviving for." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of relief. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to stay." He wanted it to be permanent. "If you'll have me." "As what?" Daniel stepped closer, taking her hands in his work-roughened ones. "As a husband, as Henry's father, as a family." The word hung between them like a bridge neither had dared cross. They were finally a family. "Daniel, are you proposing to me?" "I suppose I am. I can't promise an easy life, or that I won't sometimes wake up fighting old battles, but I can promise I will never leave you to face anything alone again. I can promise Henry will grow up knowing what it means to have a father who would die before letting harm come to him." Catherine searched his face, seeing not just the scarred soldier, but the person he was becoming. "And I can promise you that love doesn't have to hurt the way you remember. Sometimes it's gentle, sometimes it's safe, sometimes it's simply home." The kiss that followed was quiet and deep, recognition, acceptance, the sealing of a promise building between them since that first day by the woodpile. "Mama!" Henry called out with a weak but joyful voice. "Mr. Brooks," Henry's voice called from the house, stronger now. "I'm hungry." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the snow-covered yard. Catherine took Daniel's hand, and together they walked toward the house where Henry waited. Henry appeared in the doorway, still pale but grinning. "Does that mean you live here now?" Daniel looked at Catherine, who nodded. "If your mama says it's all right, I'd like that very much." "Can I call you Papa Daniel?" The question stopped Daniel in his tracks. He knelt down eye level with the boy. "Henry, your papa was a hero. He died fighting for what was right, and nothing I do will change that. I can't replace him." Henry's face fell slightly. "But if you want someone to teach you to use an axe safely, and help your mama take care of this place, and make sure monsters never bother you, I'd be honored to be that person." Henry considered this with childhood gravity. Finally he nodded. "I think I'd like to call you Papa Daniel. Papa Thomas is in heaven, but Papa Daniel is right here." And in that moment Daniel understood that healing didn't mean forgetting the past. Healing meant making space for new love alongside old grief, building tomorrow on yesterday's foundation without being trapped by it. "Then Papa Daniel it is," he said, gathering the boy into a careful hug. Catherine watched them together, her heart full. The widow who had thought her story was over had discovered it was just beginning a new chapter. The soldier who had believed his war would never end had found his peace. As winter began its retreat toward spring, their small house filled with new sounds, Henry's laughter as Daniel taught him to whittle, Catherine humming while she cooked meals for three, the comfortable silence of people who belonged together. The town had opinions, of course. Some whispered about propriety and mourning periods, but for Catherine, Daniel, and Henry, the whispers no longer mattered. Their family had finally found peace. As the stars shone brighter, Catherine leaned into Daniel's shoulder, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Henry's laughter echoed through the night, a melody of innocence and promise. Together they watched the horizon, ready to face every tomorrow hand in hand. The night was calm, and for the first time in years Catherine felt truly safe. Daniel's hand covered hers, steady and reassuring, while Henry's laughter still echoed faintly from inside. This was no longer just a house. It had become a home built on second chances and quiet strength. They all knew life would still bring hardships, but facing them together as a family changed everything.